Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's conversation as part of Empowerment Squared's series on mental health and resilience for newcomers. My name is Mark John Stewart. I'm an advisor to Empowerment Squared and a longtime supporter of the organization. Today, I'll be acting as your host to facilitate a really interesting discourse with two fascinating guests who I'll introduce shortly. But just before that, some of you may be joining the conversation for the first time. This series is put on in partnership by Empowerment Squared and Refuge Center for Newcomer Health. Many of you are familiar with Empowerment Squared. The organization's been around for coming on 13 years now, and we've now helped over 3,000 newcomer youth and family to integrate into Hamilton and Canada, and we're building the Liberian Learning Center in Liberia in West Africa. So a great organization, and today's conversation is actually going to be on community building, which has been something foundational for our organization since we launched. One of the pillars of Empowerment Squared is actually thought leadership. So in addition to running our programming, we realized that we've been coming up with innovative and unique ways to respond to the needs of our community. So we're very committed to talking about how we do those things and bringing them out to the world. So the conversation you're hearing today, kind of Empowerment Squared TV, and all the events that we hold when there's not a pandemic, and the thought leaders we bring in from across the world and in our community are all part of the thought leadership platform that we're continuing to build to make sure that we're not only being responsive to the needs of our community, but that we're helping to share important lessons and dialogues so we can all learn and continue to grow from that. As I mentioned, the series is put on a partnership with the Refuge Center for Newcomer Health. Refuge is based here in Hamilton as well. They offer health service for newcomers who wouldn't be able to access them otherwise. They're a great pillar in our community, and I'm really pleased to see the two organizations coming together to put on this series about mental health and resilience. We are focused on newcomers, but at the same time, mental health is something that we all have. So these conversations are something that are relevant to anybody listening, everybody in the Empowerment Squared family, and any of our guests that are joining us. So our specific conversation today is on community building, which I would suggest is probably an underappreciated area of mental health. It's something that has big impacts in our lives, both personally and professionally. And our two guests today both have deep expertise from their personal lives and also their professional domains that they're going to be sharing with us as we dive into the conversation. So you can join me in welcoming Dallas Lombardi and Priscilla Ankuma. And I'm not going to tell their stories because I'm gonna toss it over them to dig into them because they're so interesting. But Priscilla approaches this topic from a clinical perspective. She's actually a nurse case manager, and she has her own diverse background that she brings to bear in her professional capacity, directly dealing with mental health and topics like substance abuse. Dallas is an experienced hospitality executive, and she's quite prolific. She brings all of her advice and experience out to the world in a number of ways. She has a blog, she's a coach, she's a mentor, and so she's approaching the topic from her perspective, which is helping people bring their lives together and build on their mental health and pursue their personal and professional success. So that's the quick intros, but what I like to do, maybe we'll divide things up into sections today. I'll invite you both to maybe talk about your backgrounds, your personal stories, and then we can kind of let that lead into your professional advice as well. And I want to do that just because when we were talking before doing today's episode, I was so fascinated by how what you're doing in your professional lives has been influenced by your personal life experiences. So Priscilla, why don't we start with you? And on the personal side, why don't we kind of start from the beginning? We had a really interesting conversation about your transition here to Hamilton in Canada as an immigrant coming from Ghana. So why don't you kind of set the stage for us with that story?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mark. And before I start, I would like to also thank Empowerment Squared for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. And just like Mark mentioned, my background is in mental health and addictions, and I'm a nurse case manager. I'm also an immigrant to Hamilton and immigrated here over a decade ago. And talking about my personal journey actually links nicely into the conversation of community building. So over a decade ago, I made the decision to transition from Ghana to Canada to begin a new life. Talking about community, a lot of the time when we speak about what community is. And it means different things to different people. For me, community has to do with belonging. So it has to provide a sense of belonging. It has to be a place where you feel safe, or where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you are your needs are being met, and you get the support that you actually need as well. So once I
and I'm just kind of tying together some of the threads as you're speaking, right? But it's really interesting. I know you come from a clinical background as well, but how you're talking about both your personal experiences and those stats where newcomers come, and in your case, and often in many cases, they're coming from developing countries to a developed country like Canada, and one might presume like more amenities and more public services are available, and yet people's state is going declining in terms of their health. And we don't have an exact measurement, I guess, for mental health, because to your point, that's not screened, but you intuitively knew, and I guess, you see it in a lot of circumstances where people's health actually declines in spite of being in a place. And so would you, I'm saying, hearing you say that when you went out to look for community and you found it and you saw a benefit to yourself, that the lack of community is actually was a big contributor to people's challenges with mental health when they come here and they're by themselves and they're having difficulties with coping?
Absolutely. And I think that is actually, I strongly believe, and there's a lot of data or studies that actually support that having a supportive system behind you is always really good for mental health recovery and wellness. And within the mental health system, one of the things that we actually work hard when it comes to the way we engage with our clients is with addressing social isolation. And especially during the era that we currently live in with COVID, and the fact that we actually have to socially isolate from people. But for a lot of immigrants and refugees, when you arrive as a newcomer, that is one of the issues that you actually experience initially. You feel very, very isolated from your culture because first and foremost, you are separated from them, and you are in a new country that doesn't look anything like what you know. Mm-hmm. And you are also within a culture that is predominantly, sometimes, depending on which country you're coming from, majority of the people look different. Mm-hmm. So having to navigate your way around that and not feel isolated, and that is where community comes into play, right?
And I want to dig into it as well from your clinical and professional background, but I want to make sure, let's loop Dallas into the conversation. So we were conversing before setting up today, and you're a newcomer to Hamilton, not coming quite far from Ghana, but it was really interesting hearing some of the experiences that you had as well. So why don't you kind of introduce us to yourself in that context?
Yeah, so I moved to Hamilton 3 years ago from Toronto. When I was growing up, my family moved around a lot, all over Ontario. So I was in new schools pretty often, but once I got into high school, my parents settled us into Burlington, Ontario, so not too far away. And I actually left home really young. I left home when I was 16 years old. And that's sort of what drove me to move to Toronto. So basically, as soon as high school was over, I flew to the big city, and I was just determined to have a fresh start. And I got right on the career path and just started that hustle. So I moved when I was to the city when I was 18 and got into management and leadership really right from there. So I became a director by the age of 25. And when I was 34, which is when I was living in Hamilton, I walked away from my corporate career and decided I actually had no idea what I was going to do. So here I am in this new city, literally knew no one when I moved here, didn't know any business. I knew nothing about Hamilton. It was just a place for my husband and I to settle and buy a home. And then all of a sudden I wasn't in my career anymore either. So it was a huge personal development journey for me. And now basically what I still work in, so my career has been primarily in hospitality. I've been in that industry for 18 years. And I'm still in hospitality full time, but I now also coach young professionals and leaders. I mentor aspiring leaders. I have a blog where I really try to humanize the whole executive experience that I've had and that I continue to have today. And I really just try to talk to my audience and the people I coach about the things that no one really talks about.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And I know psychology behind that, because we want to understand people and know them. That's how we get to trust them and know how we can connect to them.
For sure.
Amazing. And so, yeah, you've done really well in terms of establishing yourself as a professional in the city. And so that's where some people are in terms of their journey on mental health and immersing themselves in community. I know in your case, Priscilla, you're often working with people who are facing some more challenging circumstances, right? You're helping people who have substance abuse challenges or sometimes deeper issues. And, not everybody who's facing those circumstances is comfortable enough or is currently engaged with professional help. So what is the kind of general guidance that you're often giving people, or where are you starting them with along their mental health progression, especially as it comes to community building when they're in that type of place, which might be a very lonely place or a very challenged place, or, where's your kind of point of departure when you're helping people as a professional?
Right. Yeah. So within my program, one of the things that we do is we are very goal driven. That's one of the approaches that we use. And our whole program is based on a recovery model approach. So one of the things that we do when people are referred to us is helping them to identify what their goals are. So a lot of the time, people, before they even come to our program, they go through a referral process, and the intake process actually will screen them and identify some of the goals that a person is hoping to work on within that the clinical system that we have. And a lot of the time, people already come into our program with pre-identified goals that they specifically want to work on, but those goals are not fixed in stone, so they can change and move around with time. And we do allow people the flexibility to change their goals, because people grow and circumstances change. So once we kind of figure out what a person is looking for, then we need to start working on some activities that can fall underneath those goals that we can work on together. So, and a lot of the time we use the analogy of our client being in the driver's seat and us, the clinicians, being at the back of the car. So we always encouraging them by saying that you drive the car how you want to drive it, but just make sure that you stay on the road. Watch out for the signs and make sure you stop when you need to stop.
And the gap is, so people are aware that these, direct supports or just people or organizations that they can just engage with to lean on a little bit are there. But what stops people from actually, taking that step or moving forward, right? Where are they not making the connection? Right.
So obviously there are very significant barriers within the mental health system itself. So if you look at on the broader scope of the mental health and addiction system, there are systemic challenges that people have to face that basically have created these barriers when it comes to even cultural competency issues is one thing. A lot of the times, especially within immigrant communities, having the ability to understand someone's culture, the context is really, really important when it comes to intervening with mental health and addiction issues. And a lot of the time when people try to access the resources, they don't have access to clinicians and doctors and nurses and social workers that actually look like them. So representation does matter in that regard. And then even language plays a role there. If you have language challenges, Canada has 2 official languages, but the data actually is very clear that there are 20% of the Canadian population actually speak a non-official language. So if you're trying to access resources and you don't speak any of the two official languages, then how do you go forth? How do you access it? So that is one of the barriers that people face. And then, of course, there are personal barriers as well. Sometimes even we internalize a lot of things as well. So talking about people dealing with anxiety issues, depression, but then they actually don't even know that that is what they are going through, right? So if you are facing a lot of these challenges, but you are unaware that that is what is happening, how do you even recognize it enough to say, okay, this is what it is, and this is the kind of support available for me to actually access it. So that is also one other challenge that is there. And then there's stigma, and depending on, even within Canada, that is, a developed country, mental health and addiction stigma is one of the huge challenges that we face here. So talking about people with, a history of or coming from a different country, some of these countries actually don't even recognize mental illness as a disease or as an illness. So people are coming with all of these belief systems and value systems with them, and they carry that. So being able to even have that conversation of admitting that, you know what I'm going through is a mental illness is a whole different challenge that people face.
There's a couple of things going through my mind as you're speaking.
Right.
One is I'm glad we have somebody as thoughtful as yourself on the case as we continue to work to improve our healthcare system. And
Right.
you can just hear from the way you're talking that I know you take this approach to your work in terms of your casework, and
Right.
I'm sure how you're influencing the system as well. But also it's really interesting to hear you, I don't want to say give permission, but, you know, for our listeners, and we are doing a series on mental health and resilience for newcomers, to be opening up the conversation that it is okay to put these topics on the table, to talk to people about them, and that if you do, you're going to be positively received, you know, from people like yourself and others and organizations in the community who are keen and willing to help. So, you know, keep up the excellent work.
Right.
And then, Dallas, you're not engaging with people from a clinical perspective, but you're often acting as a coach and a mentor and passing on advice. And I know that, you know, what we're doing professionally is tied up into who we are personally. And I'm sure you're speaking to the themes of community building and both mental health or mental state in the advice you're giving people. So maybe you could kind of build from the same spot and talk a little bit about when people come through your door, you know, what challenges are they facing within these areas that are holding them back from being successful in the way they want to, and what kind of advice do you give them?
Well, you know, I've built everything I write about or coach about is always it's sort of based on my own experience. So my approach to people is always to share, you know, my journey so that I create a safe space for people to feel safe sharing their story with me too, because that is, you know, I like to dive deep and get to know people. I had my own breakdown and my own experience with mental health. I didn't think I had anxiety before. But it turns out I walked myself to the hospital and had a panic attack in the middle of a meeting. So, you know, that was a huge awakening for me. And so when I have, you know, a lot of people come to me and, you know, whether it's I want to build a business or, you know, I'm looking for purpose or I want to build a network, you know, I always just share these stories with people so that they feel safe and sort of give them permission to sort of break down the barriers as to what might be stopping them from feeling either comfortable, like we were talking about before, going out and networking within the community, or building a business.
Interesting. And I'm seeing a cue from our producers that we have some audience members sending in questions. So I'm keeping an eye out for those, and I think we'll bring some of those questions to you guys in a second. But one of the things that I wanted to ask about, and I think we have to ask about this with everything that's happening in life right now, is related to the current pandemic. And it's changed everything in, you know, every industry in so many different ways. And obviously it's changed the ability or nuances around community building, right? And the fact is we are discouraged from physically gathering, or if we are going to physically gather, it's with restrictions. And, you know, things are funny when we're walking around, people's faces are covered with masks, and we we can't see their expression, so it's harder to connect with them, right? So there's a lot of challenges that have been introduced to building a community around ourselves or maintaining it. I'll probably ask this question to both of you, but what advice do you have during this unique time that's hopefully over soon, but in terms of continuing to surround yourselves with good people, build relationships, have that support your mental health during the pandemic? So maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. So I'll probably just cite some of the things that I do personally, and then just perhaps add one or two things from a professional standpoint. So personally, you have to, for me, I had to make that intentional decision of actually wanting to connect with people and being very selective when it comes to the people that I actually want to connect with. So I think you have to scan through your relationships or your connections, and then identify the people that actually mean the most to you, because you can't connect with everybody, and then make that decision, that choice of actually saying, okay, I have to reach out. So one of the things, connecting that professional, one of the challenges that we have within that system is actually, I mentioned before, social isolation. And a lot of the time, we had to, we as leaders and my organization, and even leaders like Empowerment, we have to create space to allow people to actually come in and have community. But COVID has changed all of that. So in my personal life, like I said, my friends, I have to call them. I have to check in on them, my family. And if you can see, most of my family lives overseas anyway. So even before COVID, most of our conversations was on phone or video interaction. So that nothing has changed much in that sense. But for the friends and close family members that I have here, some of the things that I've actually been doing is doing like Zoom dates with people. So you set those up. I've done a lot of wine dates with my girlfriends, and we had to intentionally set those dates and fix it in and say that this date we are meeting, we have to engage, we have to talk and find out how each person is doing. And then professionally, we also had to have ways and means to connect with our clients virtually. A lot of our programming actually had to transition online. But of course, also recognizing that, especially within our population, the population that I work in many instances, they don't have access to internet and access to some of these infrastructure for them to actually participate in that kind of,
It's and you're reiterating, COVID's added a challenge to everything, and it's added a challenge to connecting, but it's a good point about how important it is to go out of your way to set those dates, to make sure that you do it, even though it takes the extra effort, because as we established right at the beginning, it is important to your mental health, right?
Right.
Any thoughts from your side, Dallas?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, although we are meant to be isolating physically right now, I think, the longer this goes on, you have to set those dates. Exactly what you were saying, because I think we're social beings. Like, we're meant to be together. We're not meant to do things alone. We're not meant to work alone. We're not meant to walk life alone. So, I think now is a time that it will become very easy to get in the habit of being home, not seeing people, not connecting with the people that you may have been connecting with before. But I do agree with what you're saying. One thing I've learned too is, what might have been a social network that was quite large before has really become more intimate in my personal life. But from a business perspective, in my personal life, I also have wine dates, but, from a business perspective, if you have touch points with employees, or if you're an entrepreneur and, you're used to meeting with clients, like, if you have the resources to do those online, don't negotiate on those. It's easy to just say, we'll just talk on the phone. But I notice a huge difference between the phone versus a Zoom call, because it's human connection.
Make it as rich as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
What advice do you have for people who are looking to break into a new career field and are actively seeking mentorship and career opportunities? Same challenge, right? In this difficult time.
Right.
So.
I think Dallas will probably have more to say on that, but what I will say is, connect with people. I think networking is really, really important for someone like Joseph. And I always say that people, you might surprise yourself if you do reach out to people. Most people are actually quite willing to, be helpful or to engage or offer whatever support you're looking for. I've been doing that since I finished my master's, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. And 90% of the time, people will say yes. They will actually go ahead and arrange a meeting to sit down with you. So I think you have to take that initiative and then just research a little more, figure out whom you're looking to actually engage with, and then shoot them an email. If they have a number listed, call them and talk to them. But I think start with an email just to introduce yourself, and then you kind of take it from there.
I have one suggestion on as a business professional who gets reached out to often. If you are going to reach out to people, Joseph and everybody else, I encourage you to put a bit of detail, a bit of context in your request. If I get a message that just says hello, or hello, can we set up a call? I'm a very busy person and I don't know where to fit that into my schedule of priorities. Whereas if somebody tells me, hi, I'm so-and-so, this is my background, this is where I'm coming from, and this is what I'm wondering if I could have a few minutes of your time to talk about, then I'm much more likely to have that conversation because I know exactly how I can help that person, help add some value, and I have some context around that. So just a bit of encouragement if you are reaching out is definitely lay some groundwork and let the person you're asking, whose time you're asking of, to have a little bit of context and set them up for success in connecting and helping with you.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. People reach out to me all the time, which I'm always very happy about. Mm-hmm. But, I get the, hey, Dallas, can I pick your brain? Can we go for a coffee? And, genuinely that's what I want to do as someone who loves mentoring. But yeah, I love to hear people's stories, like who are you and the why behind it, right? I love that too. But write down the word mentor. You need to have mentors. If you don't have and lean on them. So I am a 35-year-old person. I've always had mentors. I've left corporate, started businesses. I'm pivoting my business right now. And the first thing I do before I make moves is I always seek out my mentors or confidants, and if you don't have mentors, that's where the reaching out starts. Find people who are either leaders in your community or your city or even businesses that you admire. And that's where that email comes in.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And mentorship's so important. And another little piece of advice on the topic of mentorship. Mentorship isn't necessarily something super formal where somebody says, I'm going to be your mentor. No. We're going to meet every week. We're going to talk. It can be something much more informal and lighter where you're just asking somebody's particular advice once in a while. And almost like your personal board of directors where you've got people you can reach out to on occasion for specific things. Mm-hmm. It is great when those bigger relationships come about, but it's easy to form a circle around yourself. And myself, if I got asked to be someone's mentor and it was a lot of engagement, that's a big deal. Where someone's like, can I, hit you up once in a while when I have a question on these topics? I'm much more likely to say, sure, definitely. But for sure, mentorship, super important.
Yeah.
Summarize it all. The good news actually is that we do keep these conversations on Facebook and on YouTube, so our audience is able to go back and reference them and rewatch them. And if you want to connect with our guests today, Dallas and Priscilla, reach out to Empowerment Squared to make that connection. But to our guests, I do want to thank you on behalf of Empowerment Squared and on behalf of Refuge, not only for taking the time to come in and have this conversation today and share some wisdom with our audience, but also for the important work that you're doing in our community. As you both mentioned, we're all in this together, and it's a team effort to do well for ourselves, but to raise a community. Mm-hmm. And it was great hearing both your stories and both your advice. So thank you for coming in. And to our viewers, have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.